We're going to look at nutrition from a slightly different point of view right now, because I want to talk to you about food energy. Now, this is a subject that it's very easy to go into outer space with, and so I want to make this as down to earth as possible. In our first session, I talked about the difference between modern insight and ancient wisdom, and so this is really more about the ancient wisdom part. And as I said before, it's really about language. It's about the way that people experience their environment and attempted to communicate that to each other. And so when we talk about food energy, what we're really talking about is the observations that took place over centuries and centuries of time. And I want to underline something here that I think is very important, and that is that the people, and some would say primitive people, people who lived in a pre-industrialized economy and culture, they didn't just sit around and chew the fat, so to speak, when it came to their philosophies, their folk philosophies. Their folk philosophies were developed because they were practical, and in most cases because they worked in one way or another. And so I think that it's very arrogant of us as modern people to just dismiss everything that happened pre-science and say, well, that's just superstition. There's a lot to be said about superstition in modern science, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in the course. Now, I hope you're having fun with this, because it can be fun. I want you to use your imagination here again. Let's take another look at these young vegetables growing below the ground. Imagine that each of them is dominated by a particular intention to burrow down into the earth, but they all have a little bit different character. If we look at the carrots there on the left, notice how they burrow down into the earth, and they pretty much go straight down. They don't spread out. There's not much horizontal there. In other words, they move through the rising yin energy, whereas when you take a look at what happens with the daikon radish there, the daikon also grows down, but it spreads out a bit as it goes. It doesn't have the same force moving through that rising yin energy. If you look at the turnip, here you have, it's growing down below the ground, but it spreads out even more. It doesn't have as much power over that rising yin. And with the onion, even more so. We're all very familiar with the yin aspect of the onion because the minute that you cut the onion, it releases the chemicals into the atmosphere that are contained in the onion, and it's enough to make us cry until we cook it. So when we look closer, we see a number of interesting things about this relationship of yin and yang in each of these vegetables. For instance, look how with the carrot, even though it's a sweeter vegetable and it has a strong yang energy, when we look at the top of the plant, we see that the stalk is very tight, very dense. The leaves are very small, very tightly packed, very yang. When we look at the daikon, the leaves are more yin, more spread out. When we look at the turnip, the leaves are even more spread. And when we look at the onion, we're seeing that the onion, the leaves on the top grow straight up. It's as if that yin and yang balance in there is tilted just a little bit toward the yin, that upward energy. Okay, stick with me now, and we're going to do exactly the same exercise with some yin vegetables. These are vegetables that grow above the ground. So we have our cabbage and kale, and we have bok choy, and we have spinach here as the examples. If we look at each of them individually, we see that even though they're great green vegetables, they all have a slightly different character when we look at them through the magic eyeglasses of yin and yang. If we start over there on the left with cabbage, very interesting because, see, yin above the ground, the green energy of the plant usually spreads out. It grows above the ground and it spreads its wings. But what happens with the cabbage is a little bit different. So even though it's a yin vegetable and grows above the ground, as it grows up, it turns in on itself. It has a very yang, strong yang influence. It pulls its energy into itself. It holds on to its energy, which is one of the benefits of cabbage and it's one of the reasons it's been used all over the world, because it stores really easily. You can keep it for a long time and it holds its nutrient value because it has this strong yang effect. It's very, very compacted. Kale, on the other hand, is an excellent vegetable, very mineral-rich vegetable. It's a vegetable that people have been discovering recently. Yin vegetable grows above the ground. The stalks are very hard, though, very hard stalks. It holds on to its energy, but kale will not last really a very long time. I mean, a week or so after you pick it, it's already starting to show oxidation, and it's starting to wilt a little bit. So it's a great vegetable, but the yang part of it is a little less. Bok choy, incredible vegetable, but it has a more yin energy to it. It's much more expansive. And we see this when we cook it. It holds its form fairly well. And it's a more cooling vegetable. It's really wonderful to use when it's cooked very lightly in the summertime or in the springtime. It's a very relaxing vegetable, but it's quite a bit different from spinach, isn't it? Because spinach grows very, very fast, and spinach starts to wilt the minute you pick it, which is one of the signs that it has a lot of yin energy into it and not a lot of yang. When we apply heat to these vegetables, we see very, very easily the yin and yang of them too. When you cook cabbage, it's pretty much the same cabbage you put in the pot in terms of form. When you cook spinach, it virtually disappears. Right? Why? Because it's very yin, and so the energy is dispersed by the yang of the heat. Right? So yin and yang gives us a different way of looking, and some people probably think it's a very childish way or a very primitive way of looking, but it's very interesting when you start using it dynamically and creatively and to understand what nutrition is all about. So let's take a minute and we'll look at a couple of other interesting issues here in terms of understanding yin and yang with vegetables.